Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rich Schaefer. I'm the chairman of the Suffolk County Supervisors Association and also the town supervisor of the town of Babylon. I want to thank you all for coming out today. I'm joined by my colleagues in the association, our vice chair, Supervisor Angie Carpenter from the town of Islip, our supervisor and our host, gracious host here, Supervisor Ed Romaine, and our supervisor, and we're all jealous of him because he's got what we want, Supervisor Chad Lupinacci from the town of Huntington. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is that we have all been impacted, and we've all seen the impact that the reforms that the state legislature and the governor signed last year in what I would describe as a very hurried fashion, and it did a disservice to not only the people who it was designed to help, and to eliminate the inequities that were within the system, because it didn't get a public education campaign going, it didn't get the public involved in the process, and therefore you have this crazy reaction that you've seen since January. And then on the flip side, it affected a number of areas that it really, I don't think, intended to affect. And that's because, again, it was rushed through mainly, and I'll say this, and I can say this, mainly for PR purposes, as to who can out-progressive or outdo the other in order to get publicity. And that hurt everybody. And it hurt us particularly here on the municipal level, because it got involved in things that we really didn't have to have their involvement on. Everything was working before they started reforms. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, but this sums it up, because this is what it was before to file a what we call quality of life complaint. And this is your typical high grass, debris on property, unregistered motor vehicles, all of those code violations that the towns work so hard to enforce in order to protect people's quality of life and, more importantly, protect their home values. And so this is how it went before the state legislature got involved in this. And it used to take up to a month for us to be able to process cases. Of course, those who didn't respond to our summonses went on longer, but for the most part, we got a great response based on the old way of doing things. Then the state legislature got involved, and they added about 4 additional hoops that we had to jump through in order to process a complaint received. And the complaint now, and the case now, could take up to 2 years to resolve. And this is based on conversations that every town attorney, as part of the association, has had in providing information of just what we've seen over the last 3 months as a result of the state legislature's involvement. And key to that is the fact that complaints now have to be identified, meaning that we're only as good as the information we get. And we get a lot of information from people who are concerned citizens who want to let us know what's going on in their particular neighborhood, but don't want to put their name down. And quite frankly, we don't want to put their name down because we don't want to have little neighborhood wars going on. We want to be able to go after the information, go after the offenders, and get them to educate them on how to clean up their act and be a good neighbor. And so now we can't accept any of those complaints. Our information well has dried up. Which makes us all suffer. In fact, I've spent some of my weekends going out, taking the anonymous complaint that's been given to me in the deli or the supermarket or the dry cleaner, and gone out, looked at it myself, and then put the complaint in under my name so that we could get at least a track going on the complaint in order to have that resolved. Because I've vowed that I'm not going to allow our municipality to be brought to its knees and not have our great process still going and responding to quality of life complaints. And I know, and I'll let them speak for themselves, but I know that they're working hard to do the same thing. So without the state legislature's involvement, we were great. With the state legislature's involvement, not so good. And we want to go. We want to go back. We want to go back to where they weren't involved. And again, we're not asking them for anything other than just let us go back to the way things were. And if they did that, we would be able to do what we used to do. In the meantime, if they don't want to do that, then we're all asking for the authority to have our own tribunal courts set up, which can handle our own code enforcement violations and allow us to do what we do well. We're good at handling the quality of life stuff, and each of the towns has its own unique culture on how to do that. But at the end of it, we all get the job done, and that's why we're here today asking for support for a number of bills that are listed in the handouts. And I think it's at this point, and I'll use the word desperate. I think it's desperate, desperate situation, because what we're going to do is we're going to lose the progress that we've made, and we're going to end up in a situation where we're going to have a lot of neighborhoods negatively impacted because of this change, because we're not able to do our job, or we're hamstrung on doing our job, and that's why it's important for these changes to be implemented. So I'm going to turn it over to Supervisor Romaine or Supervisor Carpenter. Okay. Supervisor Carpenter, and she's brought a guest who can give us some information on this as well.
Thank you very much. Rich really went through this very thoroughly. You know, I think all of us here, the elected officials that are here, have all been part of legislative bodies and can understand how this kind of thing happens. But when legislation is rushed, there are unintended consequences. And the municipalities here on Long Island are the victims of those unintended consequences. It has caused more work on the part of our people. It has diminished the amount of complaints that are coming in, because right now we're alerting people to the fact that they can't be anonymous. They have to give us their information. And they're like, whoa, you know, I don't want to do that. It's my neighbor. I don't want to start a problem. And like Rich, you know, I call in a lot of things myself, but that really isn't the way it's supposed to work. And the thing that scares me, you know, we're also talking about pools, swimming pools. We get a number of complaints about people that have pools that don't have the fencing, don't have the, you know, proper things in place that they're supposed to have with a pool. And God forbid a kid drowns because a complaint wasn't made because of this legislation. That would really be terrible. And, you know, we're not looking to, you know, throw stones at the legislature. They have a job to do, and I'm sure that their motives in the beginning were pure. And to the point of the legislation that we're looking at here today, I personally think the easiest way to go is to just carve out an exemption for the municipalities and then work it all out. But this was not meant, we don't do bail, you know, so we should not have to adhere to all of these things that have been put in place with this legislation. Because to go the other route, to create our own tribunal, you know, is going to have a cost associated with it. We're going to have hearing officers and everything that's associated with that. And at a time when the governor, and rightly so, is calling for consolidation, is calling for less layers of government, forcing us to create more government really is counterintuitive to what his goals are. So hopefully when he sees and hears and mulls it all over, we'll get that exemption that I think is probably the cleanest, easiest way to go. So having said that, Rich?
Supervisor Romaine.
Romaine. And two, I just want to mention, I have with me our Deputy Commissioner of Public Safety, Tony Prudenti, and he can speak a little bit to the process and how it has affected us with code enforcement and everything else that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I also have Dave Moran, who is our Deputy Town Attorney, who can tell you what this new legislation that the state legislature hoisted on us has done in terms of time commitment, in terms of code enforcement, in terms of staffing, in terms of all of those things. Been in government a long time, and I can tell you the one thing that you always think about is the law of unintended consequences. And boy, did it hit home with this. So Rich and Angie have both pointed this out. We first heard about this as an association of supervisors when the district attorney came in at the end of last year, talking about this legislation, how it was going to affect the criminal side. None of us thought that it was going to affect the civil side and code enforcement. But the discovery laws that the state legislature passed has done exactly that. So now, if you live next to a guy that has a house with 2 illegal apartments and 4 or 5 unregistered vehicles and trash on the property, if you call, we are obligated by state law to tell the guy next door that you called, give your name, address, etc. That has had a chilling effect on code enforcement. Most of code enforcement depends on egregious situations. Our Director of Public Safety, or Commissioner of Public Safety, John Meehan, former Chief of Patrol for Suffolk County Police, just came in. But that has a chilling effect. You're not going to call. You're not going to complain. What does that do for the quality of life? Look, we all know what it has. Dan Panico was here earlier. Last week we drove around Mastic Beach to look at quality of life issues, to make sure that they were all being addressed. It's a serious situation. I'm supportive of this legislation. I join with my fellow supervisors, and I'm going to turn it over to Supervisor Chad Lubinacci from the town of Huntington. Chad?
Thank you, and it's certainly great to be here today and speak about something that, you know, is very true to Huntington. And just to start off with a little question, what do you think Syracuse, Yonkers, and Huntington have in common?
They all have their own.
We're the only 3 towns in the state of New York to have our own tribunals.
I said we're jealous.
Yes, I know. We're going to be up and running in May, but just to give you a little history of how it happened, when I was in the state assembly, the town of Huntington passed a home rule message, and we drafted the legislation in the assembly and also in the Senate. At the time, it was Assemblyman Ray and myself that got it passed in the assembly. Then up in the Senate was Senator Marcelino and Senator Flanagan. And this was back in 2017 when I was running for supervisor. Now, I thought the governor was going to veto the legislation like he did in prior years. So I'm sitting in my office as supervisor in February of 2018. The town attorney comes in and says, "Did you know your law got signed today?" And there it was. And we were able to start the structure of our own tribunal, which has been great. So many of the problems that were discussed today can be eliminated by the towns, the other 9 towns in Suffolk, the 3 towns in Nassau, creating their own tribunals. And if you look at the chart here, which kind of explains it, you can look at the efficiency here. Here are the other towns, and here's going to be Huntington, right? So in terms of the efficiency of the process that it's going to take, and also the labor-intensive process that it is underneath the new state laws. You know, you have your code enforcement agents and your public safety agents that are with us today, and at least in Huntington, a lot of the time invested has to comply with the new state regulations and the new state laws. So your code enforcement agents, instead of having to comply with these rules, will be out and able to enforce the codes and make sure that your neighborhoods are safer, to make sure that the complaints that are coming to the office are followed up with. So it really has to do with the quality of life issues. And many of the issues you see on the board to my right are the issues that the court can take care of. So you look at it in terms of efficiency. We look at it making sure that the public is more safe, because the code enforcement officers can be out in the streets looking and, you know, prosecuting, if needed, those violations. And also it just makes it a lot better because the town can move things much more quicker in their own courtroom. So we're very happy to be one of the first towns on Long Island to have the tribunal, and we know that we'll share the information with the other towns. And I know that there is state legislation by Senator Gorn and also by Assemblyman Thiel that we definitely support, because if it's going to work in Huntington, it should work with all the other towns throughout Long Island. It's something that we are very, very proud of. The other thing that allows more local control over code enforcement, because you're able to obviously deal it more efficiently, but also the billing of it. So if you have someone that's not able to pay, it can be paid right on your tax bill. So that's another enforcement procedure too. So you don't have to hunt down the deadbeats and the people that aren't complying. So you know, it just makes it better from that standpoint too. And of course, being anonymous. That is something that we'll still be able to do in Huntington. So if people don't feel comfortable coming forward or having to give their name, we will still be able to take anonymous complaints. So we look forward to working with our other towns and, of course, supporting our state legislators that are sponsoring this legislation, and know that we have a lot of information that we're willing to share with the other towns. So we wish you the best of luck. I know that we're here for you guys.
Just put a good word in.
You know, so, and, you know, if we have any questions about how Huntington is processing or how Huntington's moving along, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Again, back to what Supervisor Carpenter said, unintended consequences, and that's why we feel so strongly that this needs to be dealt with immediately.